Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda Rouse.
And I'm Emily Burt. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be speaking to Macmillan's Chief Executive about the charity's year of transformation. And later, in Charity Changed My Life, we'll hear how the RNLI came to the rescue for one Scarborough resident after he took a winter dip in the sea.
But without further ado, we'll go straight into this week's main discussion. We're delighted to be joined by the Chief Executive of Macmillan, Gemma Peters. She's been in the post since the beginning of last year, after 5 years in the top job at Blood Cancer UK. She started her second year at Macmillan with the launch of a year of transformation for the charity, a journey she's described as necessary to ensure Macmillan is meeting the needs of people living with cancer now and in the future by doing fewer things better. Hi, Gemma.
Lovely to see you both. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So first things first, could you please tell us the reasons behind Macmillan's year of transformation? Why was it considered necessary to do now?
So, as you've said already, I joined Macmillan 18 months ago. And when I came into the organisation, there was already a sense from the trustees and lots of people in the organisation that the ways that we were meeting the needs of people with cancer were just not stacking up to the scale of the challenge. So we're doing amazing work in lots of different places, but fundamentally the needs of people with cancer were growing and the ways that we were delivering were just not able to meet that need. So I think there are really sort of three main drivers around the transformation at Macmillan. The first one was obvious to me before I came in, and in fact I was asked loads about it at interview, which is the growing and increasing need of people with cancer. So increasing numbers of people with cancer and increasing worsening experience, greater disparities in care, and the ways that we've been trying to meet those needs just weren't scalable in a way that they needed to be. So that really has always been the primary driver. But then other things got added to it. So when I came into the organisation, like lots of chief executives, I spent the first period of time listening to people, asking them questions. I met almost everybody in the organisation in the first few weeks and asked them questions about what are you most proud of, what gives you the most satisfaction, what isn't working, what's getting in your way, what's stopping you doing your best work. I asked everyone, if I gave you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the organisation, what would it be? And that just gave me so much information about the places where we were getting in our own way. And like lots of big organisations that have grown up organically over, 100 years, there are loads of places where we could just do better, where we're getting in our own way. So that internal driver is the second thing. And then thirdly, just looking ahead at the financials, the position that we were in now, but also modelling what was that like to look like over the next sort of decade, and understanding that our cost base was rising and our income was rising at nowhere near the same rate, if at all, over that period. That meant that we've had to make some decisions around being absolutely ruthless about how we spend our money and making sure it's having the greatest impact. So it's bringing all three of those things together in this year of transformation is what we're doing. And it's big, and I think it's a challenge for any organisation, but when you're as big and as well known and as well loved as Macmillan, saying you're going to change is tricky for people, and we're right in the middle of that. But all the way through, I've been struck and inspired by people who just want to make sure we're doing the absolute best for people with cancer, and this is what it takes. We've got to change to be confident that we can be there for the next decade, never mind the next 100 years.
And of course, Gemma, I of course remember you from another life. And I think you're really interesting because as a leader, you're certainly someone who is no stranger to major strategic developments and having to handle massive global events. I remember reporting on Blood Cancer UK, where you were, of course, the leader at a previous moment. And you were, at that time, overseeing some really big things for this organisation as well. The name change, which was back in 2019. That's a huge thing for any kind of charity to go through. And of course, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic meant that you had to oversee a programme of redundancies. And I know that that's also something which you've been managing at Macmillan as well. You talked about it in your LinkedIn blog, where you were talking about the metamorphosis of Macmillan, talking about this strategy. So I would love to hear any advice, any thoughts that you have on, as leaders, how you communicate in a positive way about really, really challenging situations, which can involve things like redundancies, about those really, as you say, like difficult decisions about how money's being handled, while at the same time keeping teams informed, keeping them engaged and passionate about the visions for the future of an organisation?
It's such a great question, Emily, because it's something, I spend a lot of time thinking about and worrying about, am I getting it right? I had a great boss a few jobs ago who always used to say this phrase, which has stuck with me, which is start with the truth. Like, we've got a problem here. What should we do? Let's start with the truth. Because it sounds such an obvious thing to say, but I think people can jump straight to, how am I going to manage that message? Or what will let's just start with bringing everybody up to speed with what the situation that we're in. And then we can talk about the choices available to us. And then we can talk about the choices that we're making. And that's always how I start things. And I think sometimes that is, it sounds obvious, but can be quite radical for people. Often in organisations, people haven't been, given information about what the financial position is of the organisation, or, where we are on a kind of staff engagement perspective, or where we're not meeting needs, or where we are meeting needs. That people can be in silos in their own little bit of the organisation, and people make assumptions that they don't need to, or they don't want to understand things. Whereas I always think, we work for organisations because we care about the cause and we care about making a difference. And the whole of what we do is what makes the difference. There's no one individual from the chief exec down who themselves is doing anything really which has the huge value. The value is in the team effort. So everybody needs to understand not only their part, but other people's part. So that's my starting point in any organisation. And in some organisations, they're very used to that, and in other organisations, they're not. And if you're in an organisation that hasn't been used to that, that can feel quite scary for people, because you're giving people information and you're saying, so we've got some choices to make, but we don't know what they are yet. And I think that level of asking people to hold uncertainty with you as a leader so that you can co-create the answers to whatever those challenges are you're facing is a learned thing that you do together. It's not something that inherently people could do. You have to learn how to do it, and you have to learn how to handle some of the unknowns in that, and therefore some of the uncertainty in it, which can be really difficult for leaders and managers and people who work in organisations. So I guess one of the changes for me in my leadership over time is really understanding and being cognizant of that, and trying to support people to go through that change. You can't just, the transparency bit was always there for me, but what I realised is you can't just land that on people. You have to sort of work with people so that they understand what that's going to mean and what it will feel like. Another observation, I suppose, is that however much something, when you've gone through that process, might be logical and rational and in the best interests of both the organisation and particularly in beneficiaries of the organisation, if somebody is personally affected by those sets of decisions, like somebody's job might be on the line, what that might mean for them and their family is absolutely huge. And asking people to hold that and hold what's in best of the organisation and be able to be rational about those things is a massive ask. And not everybody can do it because of the scale of their own lives and what they're managing. So you have to be broad-shouldered, I think, as a leader in any organisation, and accept that not everybody can or will or should react in a rational way to change. So to keep making a rational argument about these numbers don't add up, we cannot continue to spend at this rate, we have to reduce the amount of money that we're spending, most of our costs is in staff, we can't do that without looking at reductions in the numbers of people, which is a conversation going on across the sector at the moment. Those things may be logical and true and right, but you can't expect people who are personally impacted by that to say, okay, then that's fine, great, thanks ever so much, I'll go then. You have to be a human being and be compassionate about what that means and hold a space for emotion. And it is okay for people to be upset and angry and sad about things. My own personal view is there are kind of some rules of the game about how you express that in a workplace. For me, you can say I'm angry, you can't shout and scream at people. Like, there are some boundaries around it, but giving people permission to feel and acknowledging that that's what people feel is a really important part of change, because why is change so difficult? Why do we see so many organisations unable to do it? Because if something has been going in a particular way for a period of time, it is because it's been working well for some people. Like, it's become the way of doing things because it has worked well in delivering an outcome over time or working for the people that are working in that way. So you're asking people to give up something which has worked and which they have known has worked. And that's a very difficult thing. So I think, allowing space for that change and people to move through the experience of change is probably the most important thing that leaders are being asked to do at the moment. Just hold that space and hold the time and don't shy away from it. The fundamentals of why you need to make the change will remain. Make the decisions for the right reasons, which are always about the beneficiary and always about the work that the organisation does, but give people space to come with you on that and allow them to feel emotion and to express that emotion and be heard in that and respond to that is what is required. And what I think my job is as a leader who is at Macmillan leading us through a really big transformation, as you say, in a different context. There was a similar job to do at Blood Cancer UK too.
Right. And you mentioned there a couple of times the beneficiaries and also the element of co-production of this process of change. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you are involving Macmillan's beneficiaries, service users, whatever you wish to call them, in this process, and particularly those people who the charity has maybe not provided for in quite as good a way as you would have liked to have done.
Yeah, so I believe that as you're going through a transformation or a change, how you do that is as important as the decisions you make about what you do. And so for me, one of the big things that I heard loud and clear from the organisation and is important, I think, in any civil society organisation, is that we needed to do more to properly involve and partner with people affected by cancer, and particularly those people who are having the worst experiences. And the organisation told me really clearly from day one that we were not doing that as well across the organisation as we could be. There were pockets of brilliance, but it wasn't something that was really well understood or we had, good practice in across the organisation. So it seemed to me that using an open strategy process involving people in the decisions about what Macmillan could be and what the potential was of the organisation, and going to people, not just who love Macmillan, have been supported by us, but to the people that we hadn't been there for, and finding ways to share decision making with those people and work with organisations that were working effectively with those groups of people was a really important part of how we were going to learn and improve as an organisation. So I also think it helps you make better decisions, but it was also part of culturally learning to flex some new muscles and do some new things and send a signal that we were going to work in a different way. So that's why we designed an open strategy process, which has been so energising and challenging at the same time for us as an organisation and for me as a leader, because we set out to say we're going to involve all these people in what we do. And so try running a strategy process in which you get 30,000 people who want to be involved and you find ways to involve them. But that is not easy. And some of that has necessarily been a kind of tell us what you think about this. But the most exciting stuff has been when we have gone out and had deep conversations and done work with different bits of the cancer community who in the past have not felt very well served by Macmillan. So it has taught us how to work differently. It's taught some things about how you share power, about how you reach decisions. It has challenged us on some areas we thought we were doing really well in where we're not. It's challenged me and the executive team. One of the things that has been the most satisfying is we put in place a kind of shadow group to work alongside the executive team, who are senior lived experience advisors. So they are people who have a cancer experience, but also have experience beyond that allows them to contribute to the Macmillan strategy. So it might be that they are themselves founders of a cancer charity or organisation, or one of the people on the group works in healthcare industry, so already has transformation as part of their professional brief, as well as having had a cancer experience. And we ran a process to recruit those people. We're paying those people, and they are working alongside the executive team to challenge us and to support us in some of the most difficult decisions about where we prioritise. And it is a group of people who in the past have not had an opportunity to work with Macmillan, or perhaps wouldn't have said that Macmillan was an organisation that had served them or their community as well. So it's been a massive learning experience for me and for the leadership of the organisation. And the result is the place where we've landed strategically is a braver, bolder place than we would have been if we had taken a much more traditional approach, which is, do it in a condensed period of time, do a bit of desk research about what's happening out there in the sector, look at our own work on trends, look at what's happening on our income, do a bit of SWOT analysis, come up with a model, and off we go. This has taken us more than a year, and bringing that down into a set of succinct decisions is not for the faint-hearted, but the result is one where we can really stand up and say, this is where Macmillan can have the greatest impact for everybody with cancer and for those people who are having the worst experience. So it is worth it. Have we learned loads of stuff that I would do differently next time? Yes. Was it the right journey to embark on? Definitely. Has it allowed us to test out some muscles organisationally and to get stronger in some things? Definitely. Are some people who are very action oriented in the organisation a bit frustrated that we're not on it, we haven't finished it yet? Yes. So, there are pros and cons, but it's just a really different way of getting an organisation to think about how it holds its power and who has the power and how to have the greatest impact in the world. So overall, I'm a big fan of it.
And as you say, you are at the moment still on this very radical journey, and it's really refreshing to hear you say, like, there are things that we might do differently next time, definitely challenges, maybe things we got wrong. But once you are through this, if indeed this is ever the sort of work that really has a clear-cut conclusion, what does the year after the metamorphosis look like? What's your vision for what Macmillan is ultimately going to become?
Yes, so the first thing you said in your question, of course, anticipated what I would say is, which is, it isn't done. You don't do it. But what I'm trying to do with the organisation is for us to create a vibrant, connected, responsive organisation that doesn't ever have to go through a big year of transformation again, because we are changing with our supporters and beneficiaries as the needs change. So we are much more responsive and kind of adapting as we go. And that involves people in the organisation working differently. We're less siloed, we're more broad in our brief. We are absolutely all expert at understanding what's happening for people with cancer. Those people are part of the organisation. We're testing, we're learning, we're responding, we're changing, so that there isn't a kind of, what I describe as these big handbrake turn moments. Like, this is a handbrake turn moment. I don't like those. I don't think they're things that are indicative of a healthy, strong, fit organisation. Those things shouldn't be necessary. We should be constantly looking ahead and responding and checking that our work has the greatest impact and adapting and improving all the time. And that's the future for us organisationally. I think the other big shift for me is, I think that it is really important for organisations like ours to be clear that there should be a day where we don't need to exist, and that everything that we are doing, even if that we know will take decades and decades, everything that we're doing, there is a line of sight to a day where we can pull out of things, because the system, I'm going to spend a whole podcast just talking about what the system is, but let me get away with it for this answer. The system is able to meet the needs of people within it. Like, the UK should be able to provide world-class cancer care for people with cancer. Absolutely within our gift. It is within what we can afford. It is absolutely possible. Organisations like Macmillan exist because we are failing to do that. We are trying to patch up a need which shouldn't exist. We should be absolutely clear-sighted at all times about the day in which we can move out of something and ultimately move out of everything. But in the intervening period, move out of things because we're not needed there anymore and move into something else. And so our work should be about understanding what great is, supporting the system to bring great in, supporting different bits of the system to adapt and to change themselves and to become learning organisations like Macmillan is trying to become, so that we're not needed anymore. So the idea that an organisation like ours shouldn't exist in the future, it's a simple idea, but when you take it to your heart, it's actually a radical idea in terms of how you work. And so that's the other thing that I would want to see us be in the future, is of having a really clear sense of where we are moving and why, and how things are changing for the better as a result of the work that Macmillan's doing, not just for the person in front of us who has cancer right now, but for those of us that will get cancer next year and the year after and decades later, that those same problems won't exist for those people in the future, because we're fixing it right now for the person in front of us, but we're also fixing it so that that same thing doesn't arise. And we're not an organisation that is in the business of finding cures. I'm really grateful there are other organisations that are pushing hard at that. We're in the business of making sure that people's experience once they've got the disease is the absolute best that it possibly can be. And we're very far from that at the moment, but we can't deliver that. We're too small to deliver that. We'll never be big enough to deliver that ourselves. We have to support other people to deliver it and show them what great looks like. So that being part of how we work as an organisation is a big shift.
It's really interesting to hear you say that, not least because of the current shortcomings in the system, combined with the fact that more and more people are likely to be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. And also an interesting observation on the role of organisations like Macmillan in supporting the system, which I think is a very pertinent point for right now in the state that we are in today in society, around the world. Arguably, there's never been such a need for charity services across the board, across all different cause areas. So I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on the role that the charitable sector as a whole has to play right now in society, and how it can improve its offering, perhaps through different ways of working together.
Yeah, so you're right. Like, why does our sector exist at all? Because there are needs not being met. And then people say, I'm going to try and help meet this need. And they set up an organisation, and then those organisations grow or succeed or fail over time. And there are now greater needs, greater inequity, more hardship, more challenges being faced in the UK than I've seen in my work lifetime, for sure. And so what that really does is put our sector in a challenging place. And one of my concerns for us is that we get so overwhelmed by that need and trying to meet the need of what's in front of us, the person who can't afford the bus to their cancer treatment or who can't afford to eat. Those needs are increasing and they're so urgent and real. And yet, if we spend all of our time only in that space, we will never be in the space of understanding how we work together, both as a sector, but across sectors, to change those things for good. And one of the things that I'm excited for about Macmillan and excited for about our sector is that there is hope in this time of real crisis for many people in the country. There is hope because I see people mobilising and working differently. I see different sectors coming together and thinking about how they work with civil society in different ways. I see people searching for change and ways of doing things, which is a direct result of the need being so much more obvious to so many more people. That is our time to say, we are those organisations that operate in the space between those people that hold power, those people who are experiencing the greatest challenges, those people that want to do something about it. And, so for Macmillan, that is a huge community of donors and supporters who love the organisation and trust it. Millions of people with cancer who use our services every year. The tens of thousands of professionals who wear our badge, the power holders who need space and want to work differently, companies who want to work with like that space that we can hold across the sector and across the players in it to say, come on, this isn't working as we're doing at the moment. We've got to create the space to do things differently. That is where our sector is absolutely at its best and needed the most. So my fear is we're so hand-to-mouth that we don't spend the time on those things, which mean that the cycle continues and gets worse. And you'll have seen, you report on it, like it is heartbreaking how many organisations are not surviving this period. And so the responsibility, I think, for organisations like mine, who of course face those challenges too, but just have more ballast because we've got more scale, to really work with other organisations to support them, to make sure they're able to do the things that they're doing really brilliantly, feels more important to me than it ever has at any point that I've been in the sector up to now. So it's been actually a big part of the strategy work has been, right, you're doing incredible work, these organisations, what can we do? What do you need in a partner like us? How do we bring you to the table and get out of the way? That feels like it's incumbent on larger players in our sector to do much more of that. To summarise that point about hope, we have to be the hope. There absolutely is hope. There are ways of doing things differently, even within the constrained resources we've got, which will deliver more for people at a time when they need us the most. That is true across the sector. There's definitely a willingness, in fairness, I think it's always been there, but stronger now, to work together with each other as a sector, but also to work together with other partners. And I think, at least from a health perspective, like the change in government means there's a different tone about how we will work with civil society and the ultimate power holders who sit across the four nations and in Westminster, how we will all come together to solve some of these problems, because that's what's needed. This is a time of monumental shifts, and we are absolutely well placed, the best place maybe in our sector, to be at the forefront of those. But we've got to create the space for ourselves to think through that and to work through that if we're going to make the difference that we need to.
Thank you so much, Gemma. So much food for thought here. And I think, you are absolutely right. You mentioned there that this is a really, really difficult time for the sector. We are reporting on charities which are going under because financially they just cannot afford to carry on anymore. And there are many, many others who are also in a position of having to make these really difficult decisions that you've talked about a lot over the course of this interview. So in the spirit of working together, in the spirit of organisational support, I wonder, do you have any final words of wisdom for other charity leaders who also are in a position where they are having to make big organisational changes in response to the many challenges they're facing?
One of the things I observe is that sometimes we're not good at thinking long term. And so often we are managing budgets year to year, and the earlier we can think about kind of 2, 3, 4, 10 years, the better. And easier said than done, I know, and I get it, but there comes a point in decision making where you have far fewer options because you're coming at it too late. So my kind of plea to people is, the earlier you can see something coming and the earlier you can start to engage people in what solutions might be, the much likely there is a better outcome. It's a sadness to me that in this sort of still relatively new job, many organisations approach us, but right at the last minute, to say, something's about to happen, can you do something? We've got 24 hours before the liquidators are in, or whatever. It's like no one can do it. No one can have the right conversations about how it is we support people, particularly beneficiaries, through that at that sort of notice. So I think the earlier those conversations can start, the better. I've said it all the way through, and easy words, right? But I think always making decisions in the context of what is best for the beneficiaries of the organisation. And sometimes that can feel really hard to people that work for an organisation because it feels like you're not valuing them enough. But I think it's perfectly possible to put right front and centre the decisions that are the best for the beneficiaries of an organisation, and understand that what's best is having a really strong and supported workforce at the organisation. But I think just for me, it's always like, if things are difficult, the thing I have to hold true to is what's in the best interest of the people with cancer that we're there to support. The other thing I'd say is, particularly for leaders of organisations, like, these jobs are really lonely, and making sure that your network is strong it's a very generous sector in terms of people's willingness to spend time with people and, talk things through and share ideas and make sure that network is in place from the beginning. The other thing I observed, particularly in the last year or so, is I don't think there's enough support for boards through this stuff. So it can often be that when it comes to crunch times, it's trustees who are in the driving seat rather than executive teams for all sorts of reasons. It feels to me like there could be more support to think about how do we connect trustees to each other, particularly where there are organisations that may be in different bits of the sector, but who have been through similar experiences, who can kind of learn from it. Because, I end up talking to lots of people at different, who've been through change, and sometimes that's been really difficult. Sometimes organisations have closed and sometimes organisations have come through it and thrived. But whichever happens, people sort of move on from it very quickly, and the learning of it and the sharing of those stories and experiences doesn't happen enough. And so I think something that allows actually people to come back together, we implemented at Macmillan this thing called after action review, which is like essentially something happens, something goes wrong, you come around it and say, right, let's just go through what happened, used in lots of different settings. But I would really like to see us do that as a sector around some organisations that no longer exist and that people regret that those organisations are no longer there. Let's think together about what happened. Let's learn it. And, from a trustee perspective, from peers in other charities, from the people that were inside it. And then let's say, so what is it that we need to do that stops there being another 100 of those next year, or 1,000 or whatever? Because it's almost like the trauma of it, particularly where it's ended badly, is so great that people lock it in a box and can't talk about it again, or feel like somehow personally it was their fault, so it's something they feel ashamed of, when of course it isn't. It's about a society that is not meeting the needs of people in the right way and is not supporting organisations in the right way. So maybe that's a third sector thing we could do, some after action reviews on some of these things that have happened to us as a sector and bring in people to reflect and share experiences. I think it could be really powerful.
Hey, listen, I'll commission you anytime, Gemma.
Good pass back, well done.
Gemma, it's been so great to have you on and to hear your thoughts, ideas, suggestions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, lovely to chat as always, and thank you for all your great work, and I've enjoyed listening to these, so I hope this is useful for people as the others have been for me.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Gemma, and now we move on to Charity Changed My Life, in which we bring you the stories of people whose lives have been transformed for the better thanks to the work of charities. This week we hear from Michael, who's going to tell us how the RNLI saved his life in more than one way when he got into trouble at sea.
For the last couple of years, I've been really interested in cold water swimming. It's about getting cold and then warming up again. It gives you an amazing feeling. You seem sharper. Physically, you feel better, and mentally too. It was the 8th of January this year, and I met with my friend Adam to go for an early morning swim. The sea seemed a little rough, but nothing we hadn't seen before. We walked out above waist height, but not too much further. And in quite a short time, we were pushed out to sea. And when we tried to get back, Adam just managed it, but I wasn't able to get back to shore. And that's when my RNLI water safety training kicked in. And I needed to get in the best position I could. And the float to live, or some people call it starfish position, you lie back in the water, your ears are sort of slightly under the water, and you're able to push your chest out, and it gives you really good buoyancy. I did my Pilates breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, and just tried to remain as calm as I could, hoping that the RNLI would find me before the cold got me. You do think, could these be my last few minutes? I knew the cold was getting me. I was in a lot longer than I would be normally. So yeah, what a sight that was, that yellow RNLI lifeboat coming towards me. I was waving away, and I just felt so happy and so relieved that I was going to get rescued. And they just literally haul you on to the rib, and then off they go. Quite a bumpy short ride to the RNLI lifeboat station. I was actually in the water that day for around half an hour. Now normally we'd be in no longer than 10 minutes. When I got to the lifeboat station, they tried to read my body temperature and it wouldn't read. And then a minute later, it was 25 degrees. I didn't know how bad that was, but 31 degrees is hypothermia. I felt good about the RNLI already, but just the impact, the water safety training was brilliant. Just being rescued, I mean, nearly all of these guys are volunteers, and they're giving up their time to come and rescue people like me that get into difficulties. I've not been back in the sea since then. I hope to go back in the sea soon, but I just need to sign off from my better half.
That was Michael telling us about the life-saving assistance he received from the RNLI in Scarborough. And if you'd like your organisation to be featured in Charity Change My Life, we'd love to hear from you. All it takes is a short voice message from someone who has benefited from your services, and you can find details of how to get in touch in the show notes to this episode.
That's it for this week. We'll be back next week to talk about how organisations in the voluntary sector have been progressing with anti-racism work over the past 4 years. And if you have ideas for other topics you'd like us to cover, please do let us know by filling in our short survey. We'd greatly value your feedback. You can find the link, as always, in the show notes to this episode. For now, thank you to our guest, Gemma Peters. Our producers this week are Till Owen and Nav Pal.